words from my mouth and the meditations of my heart be delivered to you. May you keep what works for you and discard what doesn't. Good morning. A world that works for everyone. You realize that's a vision, right? And you also realize that a vision is something that is never fully attained. A vision is like world peace. A vision is like equality for all. And as long as we are integrated spiritually into a human experience, those are things that never fully have a finish line. So to be a visionary isn't really the easiest thing or the easiest title to proclaim, because it means that you will spend the rest of your life pursuing something, working for something, uncovering something, delivering something that will never be fully finished. You think about the suffragettes and how those beginning women were visionaries in order to bring equality and the right to vote for women, and many of those beginning suffragists never lived to actually have the ability to vote. That's being a visionary. And so, as a soul integrated into the density of human form, we are truly, at our core, visionaries. But something has to become ignited. Some kind of passion has to be stirred within us, and then subsequently we have to lean into and give ourselves over to that ignition and that passion in order to become a full-fledged card-carrying visionary. Being a visionary is not glamorous at all. Not at all. It's filled with hurdles, and it's filled with obstacles, and it's filled with unfulfilled aspirations. But nonetheless, one continues to move forward because there is an aim. The word aim is one of my favorite words, because without aim, we are like archers with a bow and an arrow, and we're just shooting in all directions, and there's a lot of collateral damage with that. But when we have aim, we continue to refine what it is that we are aiming towards, what we are shooting towards, what we are visioning, and what we are saying yes and what we are saying no to. And I believe that all of us are groomed to be visionaries. Another word for visionary is pioneer. To be a pioneer means what? To move into uncharted territory. What makes one want to go into uncharted territory? A vision, being a visionary. History shows that the world is not very kind to pioneers, particularly in the act of pioneering. But oh my God, do we love them afterwards. And we love the manifestations of their pioneering, and then we proceed to give them accolades and to revere them almost as if they are gods. I was fascinated because I am a great lover of Paramahansa Yogananda. If you know who Paramahansa Yogananda is, his book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, is considered one of the top 5 spiritual books of all time. If you've never read it, read it. How unlikely, it was Steve Jobs' favorite book. And he used to, in his declining years when he was battling cancer, gave that book to every single person that he ever came across and said, you must read this. It's a fascinating book about a Hindu man who was destined to bring the yogic philosophy to the Western world, to do something pioneering, to show up as a dark-skinned man in the United States in the early 1900s wearing a turban and a long flowing robes, much like Dale. I'm so jealous of Dale's outfits. I learned today that he sews his own, so I've given him my measurements. But being mocked, at the same time being curious and watching his story unfold, particularly when you read Autobiography of a Yogi, you can't help but be inspired by that singular word, devotion. Devotion to the vision. And Someone just released another book about Yogananda. Not many books have actually been written by him. And this is also from someone who is a devotee, and so it's a very respectful book. However, it points out all of the human stuff that doesn't exist in Autobiography of a Yogi. In other words, it shows the many trials and tribulations that Yogananda had in trying to finance things, hold organizations together, build buildings, bringing organization to his vision, and how wearisome that was for him. However, he never stopped moving forward with regards to that vision. And so it's fascinating, and I loved Lori's word, paradox, because that's what you and I live in. We live in the energy of paradox. What that simply means is that that which is truth always exists. That which we call God, that which is divine order, that which is the already having received answer to whatever prayer it is that you pray, that is always there. Someone might say, how do you know that? We only grow to know that through the practice of that prayer, through the practice of refining the aim, through the practice of moving towards the vision regardless. Because in each disappointment and each stumble and each fall, when we pick ourselves up and we continue towards the vision, something gets activated inside of us, and there is a knowing that we are on course. And the knowing says, this is not futile, this is purposeful. But that knowing only grows within an individual when that individual is moving in the direction of what their soul is designed to do. Otherwise, it's speculative. Otherwise, it's contemplating the ifs and the whats and the variables of why should we do what we do. But knowing grows as we continue to move forward. So, to know something, then, requires something. So it isn't enough to say, I know that divine order exists. I, individually, must have had an experience of divine order afterwards when I didn't see it in the immediacy of the problem. Hindsight is 20/20, right? That's how we cultivate a knowing. It's too easy to condemn something because we are perpetually casting aspersions or making other things wrong. So a true visionary is someone who continues in spite of, because there is a knowing that is cultivated. So when you look at your mandala for this week, I found this mandala, actually, on a dark and stormy night. No, on a dusty road in Bodh Gaya, India. I was so hot. The temperature was well above 90 degrees. I was trying to find some shade where there was no shade, and I was seduced into a shop by a shopkeeper who said, I have air conditioning. And so in I went. In I went to the god of air conditioning, where he pulled out this mandala, which, by the way, was hand-painted. So I want you to take a moment to look at the meticulousness of this design and to realize that everything, because this is a photograph of it. Yes, get out your flashlights and your glasses. So every single colorization, every single detail, every object is hand-painted. And I was so drawn to this, and I felt obligated to buy it because he gave me AC. But when I stared at it, which is what a mandala is for, it's for contemplation and staring. Because before there was language, there were symbols. And a mandala is a symbol that moves beyond language and speaks to the core of truth. And so when we look at mandalas, they are teaching tools. And in this mandala, there are 4 entry points. There's a north, a south, an east, and a west, or there are 4 elements. There is fire, earth, water, and air. And in those 4 entry points, it moves into the center of that particular graphic, or into the center of the hologram, or into the center of the maze, or into the center of the of the labyrinth, if you will. And what do we know that the center of all of those things represent? They represent truth. So then all of the 4 entry points represent how you and I navigate our world to get into the experience of truth. In our quest and in our pursuit of truth, what happens in human form is we get a glimpse of truth, but we don't ever actually stay there. The staying in of truth is the ethereal. The human part is getting in a little bit, seeing a little bit, getting jerked back out. Going around to the top, let me try this way. Going in, seeing a little bit, getting jerked out and pulled around. Going underneath. Do you understand what I'm talking about? To bask in the totality of truth is to be consistently in the realm of spirit. None of us in this room are consistently in the realm of spirit. It's not a good nor bad thing. It simply means that right now we're also having a spiritual experience in the density of a human body. What happens in the human body? We have to pay taxes. What happens in the human body? We get ill. What happens in the human body? We get betrayed or we get our heart broken. What happens in the human body? Suddenly there doesn't seem to be enough sufficiency, and so we worry. When those human things happen, we get sucked away from the core of the truth, and we go back to either a ground zero or we go back to a ceiling of experience that we are used to. How do we move forward into a deeper, longer lasting experience of truth? Knowing that it's there. You follow me? Knowing that truth is there, knowing that I've seen it, I've had a glimpse of it, I've had a taste of it, I've had a high from it. But how do I get back so that I create sustainability with that? And for me, the only way that I know that that is possible is by becoming someone who is a pioneer or someone who is a visionary. Everyone is a pioneer at some level. All of us are pioneering something. And so David referred to the Science of Mind magazine, and writing the daily guides is an incredible, hard, wonderful challenge, because I can get rather verbose and I can write and write and write, but it's got to fit on a page. And the editors come back and they go, David, you got to condense it down. And I'm going, but this is so good. So we are talking about how to make a 365 book from me that allows me a little more space. But nonetheless, my favorite daily guide, if you've gotten the Science of Mind magazine for August, was the first Saturday, August the 4th, where I talked about Icarus. Icarus in Greek mythology is one of my favorite characters because it's someone who I identify with. Icarus has always been used as an example of foolishness, of hubris, if you know what that word means, of someone who doesn't really stop and think carefully before they act, which is what all responsible people should do. Because what Icarus did was he built himself some wings made out of wax. And the reason why he built the wings made out of wax, because he was so enamored and in love with the vision of the sun that he wanted to go and meet the sun. And so he took his winged creation and off he flew, in spite of the warnings of other people who said, you can't go, you can't do that, this will happen to you because you made waxed wings. But nonetheless, Icarus took off on his journey. And he forgot all of the warnings, and he continued to get closer and closer and closer to the sun. And there must have been, just like the mandala, a moment where he saw truth. Because in the moment when you see truth, something happens. The visionary within us gets sparked, and we realize that we can't unsee what we have seen. We can't unknow what we know. And you can't go back into, a butterfly can't go back into being a caterpillar. you can't go back. And I believe that's what happened to Icarus. I believe he took his waxed wings, and all of a sudden it was as if he saw the yearnings of his heart. And he lost himself in that yearning, and he continued to fly. And the wax began to melt. And the Greek mythology story tells us that he plunged to his death. But the Greek mythology really doesn't spend a lot of time talking about Icarus as a visionary. It just talks about him as a foolish person. And so in morality tales, he's then about the person who doesn't think things through. And I go, poor guy. He deserves something better. Oscar Wilde, the great English writer, said, "Never regret thy fall, O Icarus, of the fearless flight. For the greatest tragedy of them all is never to feel the burning light." How many of us can say we've seen the burning light? How many of us would say, I would rather actually choose the path of Icarus and fall for the chance to be able to see the vision, rather than playing it safe and living in the perimeter, on the outside of the circle of the core of truth? And so those people like the Gandhis that we revere, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s that we revere, the Mother Teresa's that we revere, the Paramahansa Yogananda people that we revere them because of their pioneering spirit. We revere them after they're dead. But when they were alive, do you think that the whole world was championing Martin Luther King Jr.? No, they were throwing him in prison. Do you think everyone was bowing down to Paramahansa Yogananda and saying, thank you for bringing us this great wisdom? No. It was the birth of yellow journalism, and they were writing salacious articles about him and condemning him while he was trying to do his work. Dr. Will Coleman, who I love and admire and I meet with regularly, said, David, never forget the seduction of deification. Because 200 years from now, when they continue to talk about Martin Luther King Jr., who they're talking about will have nothing to do with who that actual person was. He goes, that's the danger of deification. We must never forget that the spirit of the visionary also was enduring the experience of being human. And so I was in Guatemala and was blindsided, actually, because we had worked and organized my foundation, Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. Our mission and aim is to advance vulnerable children and their families across the world with free education, life skills training, and fresh water. We do all of those things because you can't just give someone free education when they have worms or when they're starving or when they can't see because their vision is so bad and they've had no medical attention, or when they don't have life skills training. And so we try to look at all of that from a holistic standpoint in order to go, it's not just enough to give them access to free education. We have to try to create the whole body, mind, spirit component in the world. And so in Guatemala, we were working with a language school there. And one afternoon, some of the girls who are scholarship award winners in this particular school got up and they spoke to us. And I wasn't prepared for the story that they were about to tell, because I was completely oblivious to this level of human slavery in today's world in Guatemala. And it was this, that in Guatemala, being a Catholic country, it isn't unusual for families to have upwards of 10 to 12 children in that family. And obviously, it's a matter of concern that these families don't earn enough in order to be able to eat well or to educate their children. So it's not uncommon for a family to simply farm out some of their girls to are called tortillerias, where they make tortillas. Smile a little bit and you go, what's a tortilleria? Well, the tortilla is the national food of Guatemala. It doesn't matter if you are a king or a peasant, everyone eats tortillas. And so the consumption of tortillas and the process, this isn't something that you go to Kroger or Publix and you buy them in the plastic bag. These are handmade every single day. That means that the corn has to come from the field. The corn husk has to be shucked. They have to be rolled out on the stone. Then they have to go through a lye process, and then they have to cook it. And if a family has 15 people and each person in the family, regardless of age, consumes upwards of 15 to 20 tortillas, one person, a mother, will spend the entire day making tortillas. When you start to see, and it's laborious, hard, back-breaking work, the way in which they have to continue to be able to do this. And see, these tortillerias have come into being, and they farm these girls out in order to do that. And they have to be there at 6 a.m. in the morning, and they finish at 11 p.m. at night. And each girl is given $60 a month, and that $60 is sent home to their family. So the girls who were speaking to us were girls who had somehow escaped out of that particular cycle, had gotten a scholarship to become educated, because in Guatemala no one goes past the 6th grade, and they're lucky if they do that. Usually they learn how to write their name, they learn enough math to subtract and add so they can sell, and then they leave and they go and work. And so to listen to these girls' stories about how they had to escape that cycle, and how even their parents weren't keen on them getting an education, because the first question out of their mouth was, where's my $60 going to come from? So the child is looked at actually as a commodity. And there was something about Vilma. Vilma was 19 years old. She had spent 4 years in a tortilleria. She had barely seen the sunlight in 4 years. And she talked about how she was able to get out, and how she was able to come to this language school that we're working with, and that because of that, she finally believes that she can make something of herself. And I was thrown back all the way to 2004, when I was on the banks of the Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia, and I witnessed poverty like I'd never seen before. And the visionary part of me, the one that started the foundation to begin with, began to weep as Vilma talked, because I thought, she's one girl in tens of thousands of girls who will actually never be able to perhaps break that cycle. And what happened was I became curious about Vilma, but I became curious about Vilma and about her hunger, because something said in the mandala of her own mind, she saw a glimpse of truth. What was it? Who did she hear talk? What woman did she see or listen to or hear on a radio and go, I want that? And that ignition of possibility was so powerful within her that she was okay or willing to be rejected from her family, to take 2 buses every day, 2 buses that are hours in travel time in order to get to school to learn, to then have to go back and do all of the chores that are still required of her, and then start the cycle the next day all over again. What was it within her that ignited that? And I looked at her, and I looked at her hunger, and I said, there's a visionary. There's a visionary that has come into one of these entry points and said, I will not stop. And I couldn't get her out of my mind. And I said, what makes someone that hungry? And I left Guatemala and I immediately went to Salt Lake City because I was going to speak with Jafan Seeley. How many of you remember Jafan? Jafan was an active member here at SLCA and someone that I love dearly. He now lives in Bismarck, North Dakota. I know. It's like, what's wrong with you? And now he fell in love and he's engaged. And he's doing incredible work. And in fact, last week he filmed his second TED Talk. And he is working in the corporate world, bringing spirituality concepts. He just worked with NASA. He just worked with all these major organizations going in. He's 33 years old. And he used to come for years and sit on the front row. And when we had 2 services, he would come both services and he would sit. And I would go, what kind of truth has he seen? Where did that hunger come from? And so we met and we talked about our collaboration. I told him about Vilma in Guatemala. And I said to him, Jafan, help me. Why are some people hungry and some people not? And he said, don't you remember what you told me? And I said, no, I'm old. He said, you told me it's the difference between transformation and change. And I go, really? What did I say? You talked about the significance in that. And slowly I began to remember that often we are willing to be people who will explore change. What does change look like? Change means that we come into one of these 4 areas to go on a path of truth. Something happens, something changes, it's uncomfortable, we go back. We go back out into this periphery here. Change is like changing our minds. I can change my mind about something, but change allows me to do what? To change it back. Change allows me to go back. He says transformation doesn't. To be transformed means that the change has gone on to a different, complete level, and I will never be able to return back to the behavior or to the person that I was. And he said, you know, just like the butterfly. And it's easy to distinguish change and transformation in the insect world because that happens a lot. The butterfly can never be squeezed back into being a caterpillar. Once the transformation happens, that's who they are. And Jafan said to me, I find it interesting and I find it somewhat challenging to find people who are transformed. There are a lot of people who are changing, but I don't see a lot of people who live from transformation. Transformation doesn't happen necessarily on the outside. Where does transformation happen? In the mind. This philosophy is about the power of that mind. That mind is consciousness. And in consciousness, once you see truth, once you enter into whatever entry point and you get a glimpse in the middle of the mandala of truth, we have a decision to make. And it's whether or not we're going to put on the robe of being a pioneer within our own lives, not anybody else's life, within our own life, and fly closer to that which is the sun, regardless of what human conditioning tells us is appropriate or not appropriate. And we have to decide whether we're going to be change agents which is a term that I've used before, but I'm not going to use it anymore after Jafan reminded me, or transformation catalysts. It's hard. I know that was an affirmation that I just said, but it is. It's hard. It's hard to live in the energy of transformation. It can be very, very, very hard to have a pioneering spirit when everyone around us is looking for the easy way out, or when everyone around us is simply trying to survive. I get it. But here's the thing. When you come here or any place like this, or when you open a book, or when you listen to a podcast, or when you lean into something different than how you were taught as a child, you've already opened Pandora's box. You cannot unhear what you've heard. You cannot unhear that which is God, that which is the individualized intelligence that created worlds, is the same power and intelligence that exists in you. I'm sorry, but you cannot not hear that anymore. I've always quoted Marianne Williamson when she said, once you step foot on the spiritual path, you give up the right to be numb. The world needs more of us to stop trying to go back to being numb and leaning more into our pioneering spirit. Once you hear Vilma's story, you cannot not hear it. And that which is within me that has this vision of wanting to do the work that I do through my foundation looks at Vilma and goes, there will never be the totality of the fulfillment to be able to bring what Vilma deserves to everybody on the planet. It's not going to happen in this human realm. That's not defeatist. That's simply understanding that a world that works for everyone, paradox, you ready? Already exists. It already exists because the truth that's in the middle of this mandala already exists. But what is required to reveal this truth in a greater degree? All of us in our circle of influence, whether that circle to you feels small in comparison, or whether you have a social platform that allows you a greater audience, no matter what your circle of influence is, you and I are responsible for revealing that truth in the highest degree possible in order to reveal that world that already works. And so when we take hold the mantle of that and we say yes to that, then we begin to realize that there's a responsibility in the way in which we show up. There's a responsibility in the vows that we make. Ooh, that word vow. Oof. You know, when you take marriage vows. But I made a vow. I made a vow to this work, and it has consumed my life. And I could have used that time and those resources in a lot of different ways. Probably bought some really nice clothes. But I made a vow. I made a vow that after that experience in Cambodia in 2004, that I would do whatever it took to find sustainability. I didn't have the language for it back then. I wasn't as well versed in it as I am now. But the purity of the vow was there. And I have failed so many times. I have flown too close to the sun so many times. And I have crashed. But thankfully, unlike Icarus, I just got bruised a lot. And so that meant that I just had to go and create and build a new pair of wings. And so then you have to keep flying, and you have to keep flying, and you have to keep flying. And you've heard me say this, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so that which is the pioneering spirit within me cannot help but look at the situations in the world, cannot help but look at people who have created a ceiling that stops with change, that don't understand or are unwilling to move beyond that ceiling into a pathway of transformation. Unfortunately, you got stuck with me here. And I don't want to be a change agent. I can't speak the language of change agents. I have to speak the language of transformation catalyst. And so from that platform, it requires me to offer systems that break the mold. It requires the offering of opportunities for people to find different entry points into the experience of truth. It looks at dependency models and it says somehow this dependency model needs to be disrupted in order to bring the opportunity to wake people up to what transformation is like. We call that change. Change isn't readily accepted, even though when you offer it at first, it's like, yeah, and then you start to chew on gum, which begins to lose its flavor over time, right? And so this year we have been in this model, but the model doesn't seem to necessarily be working, which is fine, because when it's reflected in the give and the take and the support, it just hasn't been there. And there has been lots of things. How did you know? Thank you. There have been lots of struggles financially here at SLC, and people don't want to talk about that. I don't know why that is. I don't know why that's been an issue with me. I take ownership of that. And what's funny is being a creative type, I have attracted creative types on staff. So you got David Aurelio, creative type. You got Penelope Williams, creative type. And here's what's built in the DNA of creative types. The show must go on, right? So the budget gets cut, so we don't have money now to have a band every week. So what does Penelope do? She's over there like pounding the keys harder to make it sound like Fuji and Imra are with her, because she doesn't have the money anymore to have a band. And she's a rah, rah, rah. And David, he's up here and he's smiling and he's doing everything because we, as creative types, we're going to give you a good show. But there's not a lot of consequence with that. I've been talking to them. They're going to hate this part. But the three of us, we're getting old. We're in our 50s and 60s. And it's hard after a while to create that continuing level of sustainability. And so I have to ask you today, it's not right nor wrong if you don't want the model. And it's also viable to go back to the other previous model and continue to explore the pathway and the entry point of transformation. It's all possible. But the question is that you choose that. You choose that through your response. You choose that through the way in which you give. You choose that through the viable keeping of the vow of pledging. And that's really kind of where it kind of nosedived. is that the pledging really went down. Nobody wants to talk about it. And so it's hard. I get it. It's hard to be pioneering, and we're all pioneering. It's hard to do that. But as I told them in Salt Lake City when they were like, tell us about your pilot program, David. I said, well, we've had some great moments. There's been some brilliant moments where we've seen the sun. There have been moments, and all of you haven't witnessed it, but there have been moments in Q&A where people have revealed themselves in such a powerful way that they would never do if we didn't offer Q&A as a modality. If it was just the passive experience of me talking and you listening and then you leave. There have been moments when we have glimpsed an insight or an aha from a different voice, a different spiritual teacher, that someone has said, you know, I never heard it that way. And it doesn't need to come from me. It needs to come from whomever is before us. And so I just put it out there again to you today to consider, to let's all get clear about what we want. And let's decide it's not right, it's not wrong. But whatever pathway we do choose, this is my charge to you, is that you consider what will be the thing that will move you from being someone who simply changes into someone who transforms. That's what I want for you more than anything else. That's what I want for you. And like I said, you got stuck with me. You got someone who doesn't fit in a personality mold. You got someone who kept building wax wings, who cannot help but deliver from that particular level of knowing. And I hope that if you're here, that means something to you personally, and that you find a way in your path as you look at this mandala and you say, what's my obstacle into getting more into the center of that truth? What's my resistance? What is it every single time I hit this particular ceiling, I run back to what's familiar? What is that? And when you and I become curious enough to ask those questions, then we have already leaned into being willing to go into a corridor and into a path in this particular image that we haven't yet explored yet. So no matter what age you are, no matter what age I am, I do have to tell you this. I'm going to confess. So I was in Costa Rica, and I was doing shamanic practices. I'll let you fill in the lines with what that means. I'm in the jungles in Costa Rica, and I'm in shamanic practice. And the first night with the shamans, and oh, Lord, I'm traveling through portals. And then, poof, there I was. And insights started coming to me, like clarity about people. I'm like, why do I need to know this? And stuff about people's addictions and behaviors, and why my mother was a rageaholic. I mean, all this stuff was coming to me. And then all of a sudden, it just went, you're going to die when you're 70. And I went, what? Said, you're going to die when you're 70. And I was like, really? And I thought, oh my God, that's like 10 and a half years. And I went through this grief, and I went through all this remorse, and I was like, oh God, really? Can I have a few more bargaining? I was just all this stuff. And then I got to this place of resolution, and I went, okay, all right, 70. So I got 10 years. I better get busy. Whew, I got lots to do in 10 years, right? And then all this other insights were coming to me, and then all of a sudden it came back to, well, we didn't really mean that you were going to leave your physical body at 70. It meant that you, as David Ault, will die at 70, and you will be known as something else. And I was like, and then I started to laugh. You know how you get the giggles? Because the only name that I could come up with was Baba Ganoush. And if you don't know what that is, I'm like, it would be an eggplant dip. But we're all going to die from this form. Some of us sooner than later. And that's why I think that the pathway to transformation would be something that we should get revved up about. Because you know what? Your commitment, your vow to transformation is what's going to make the vision of a world that works for everyone come alive. Can you imagine the someone or someones that you will influence when you decide to become someone who commits to transformation? And that's what we are here for. And that's what I'm committed to. And that's what I ask you to be committed to as well. And so it is. Hi, I'm David Ault, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision, and that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.